If you've been watching the channel long, you know that during the Vintage Computer Festival of Midwest 2022, I got a new Commodore PET. In this video, I want to explore the question, should I or you upgrade a stock Commodore PET? Let's do some quick housekeeping and remember that you can support the channel over at buymeacoffee.com/retrocombs. And for this video, don't forget, everything you need is in the video description below, and I do have a companion blog post that you're going to love. Now let me share a little bit of history about how I acquired the Commodore PET. I purchased it, as I said, at Computer Vintage Festival Midwest 2022 from Scott Campbell at Bonus Life Computers. Now, in speaking with Scott and looking at some additional information, I was able to come up with the following history about my Commodore PET 2001. The first thing I noticed was on the back of the Commodore PET was a property tag that tells me the PET went into service at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. You know, it's kind of appropriate that this Commodore PET is back in the hands of a higher education professional. I also reached out to Chris Hutchins, and he shared with me his wonderful PET database. If you want to know anything about any PET that might still be out there in the inventory, this is the database for you, linked down in the video description. And his database tells me the PET ended up in a Goodwill store in Southern Nevada, and Chris was kind enough to capture those images from the eBay listing that Goodwill was using to sell this Commodore PET. So I checked in with Scott over at Bonus Life Computers, and he verified that he did in fact get this Commodore PET from Goodwill. He said, yep, it came from Goodwill, I believe in Arizona. You would be correct. We had to swap the power supply with a unit from another 2001, rebuild the keyboard, and I think there was only one bad RAM chip. So thank you, Scott, for that additional information. Now, I'd wager there's an owner in between the University of Las Vegas and Goodwill. I'm going to conjecture that the university sold the PET at a public auction, or a lucky computer scientist took it home. If you're watching this and you have an idea where this Commodore PET may have come from, please leave a comment down below. We would really like to track the history of this historical piece of Commodore tech. The Commodore PET was part of Byte Magazine's trinity of home computers, to include the Commodore PET, the Apple IIe, and the Radio Shack TRS-80. The Commodore PET was the first mass-market Commodore computer and saw moderate success. There were several models released before the PET line ended in 1982, selling over 200,000 units. I was 12 when Commodore released the PET. By 1982, I had saved enough money mowing lawns to purchase my first computer, the Commodore VIC-20, and it would have been a financial burden for my family at a cost of around $800. So let's dig in a little bit deeper and learn more about my Commodore PET. First of all, the full nomenclature for the computer I have is the Commodore Business Machines, or CBM, Personal Electronic Transactor, or PET, model 2001-N-8. Now let's take a look at some of those numbers and characters. First of all, the choice to use both PET and 2001 to describe the computer is kind of interesting. Now, Wikipedia states that PET is a backronym, or an acronym looking for a definition, to capitalize on the pet rock craze of the 1970s. A Campus Curiosity page on the PET shares the reason for the number 2001, and most of you can probably guess where that number came from. According to the page, it appears the designer Chuck Peddle was inspired by the sentient AI machine HAL 9000 from Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey.
The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made.
Peddle paid homage through the use of a three-letter name combined with the number 2001 and PET's microgramma logo, this being the font of HAL's interface. The N that follows the 2001 reference indicates this Commodore PET includes a black and green monitor. Finally, the 8 means the PET has 8 kilobytes of memory, which is 4 kilobytes more than the base model. So these are the specifications for my Commodore PET. As I mentioned, it's a Commodore PET model 2001-N-8. It was built in the United States, likely sold around 1978. The serial number for my pet is 0040424. The PCB assembly number is 320137. It comes armed with a 1 megahertz MOS 6502 processor. It also includes ROM version 1, more about ROMs later. It operates on 115 volts at 60 hertz, has a 9-inch display, a Datasette, and a chiclet keyboard. An old Commodore PET brochure says the PET comes in at 16.5 inches wide, 18.5 inches deep, 14.5 inches high, and weighs a hefty 44 pounds. I can verify this is one hefty piece of tech. Let's turn on that display and talk about it. The 9-inch 60-hertz display includes a 40-column by 25 rows or 1,000 characters. It's black and green screen that supports upper, lowercase, and PET characters. As you saw, warm-up time is pretty fast. It turns on seconds after throwing the massive power switch on the back. The screen is steady and easy on the eyes for a CRT. The PET supports 2 Datasette units. The PET that I have, the 2001, includes a built-in cassette recorder with an additional Datasette on the back. Later models drop the internal Datasette to accommodate a full-size keyboard. Users save programs to and load programs from a cassette tape inserted into the Datasette. The command to save a program was save, and the command to load a program was load. After each command, the PET prompts the user to hit specific Datasette buttons. The PET also includes fast forward and rewind buttons. However, without a counter, locating programs on the cassette tape is a challenge. The unit includes a combined stop and eject button. Now, the keyboard is a love-hate relationship. With a history of creating calculators, Commodore's use of this style of keyboard is not a huge surprise. However, the keyboard pales compared to the other 2 computers in the 1977 trinity of computers. To make up for the lack of a full-size keyboard, Commodore made some interesting and peculiar design decisions. The keys are in a rectangular array, not offset like we normally find on modern keyboards, making it very difficult to touch type on this keyboard. However, that arrangement shouldn't surprise us. It's very similar to a calculator, which was Commodore's previous business. There's even a little bit of color splashed onto the keyboard. Alphanumeric keys are tan, character supplemental keys, such as return, shift, space, clear, home, and insert delete, are red, and user keys, off, reverse, run, stop, cursor up, down, cursor right, left are light blue. Pressing cursor up, down, or cursor right, left will move the cursor down and right. Hold shift and the corresponding key to move the cursor up and left. Commodore repeats this cursor key arrangement on both the VIC-20 and C64, so moving the cursor around for anybody familiar with Commodore computers is not surprising on this Commodore PET. Now here's the love-hate relationship I have with this keyboard. You hate using the keyboard and you cannot touch type on the thing. But because you can't touch type on it, the keyboard kind of makes sense and makes hammering out longer Commodore BASIC sequences faster. Faster than touch typing? No, but if you have to suffer with hunt and peck, things can go quicker with this layout. And also because of the keys on the top row reveals all the special characters without a shift, it does make things just a little bit speedier. Let's, and I'm going to use the term correctly, unlike a lot of folks out there, let's literally lift the hood on this bad boy. As you saw, the case includes a hinged top to open the PET like the hood of a car. It even includes a hood stand. Inside the PET is the motherboard and power supply. There's even ample room left over to throw in a spare tire or luggage for your weekend travel, or maybe your phone. Yeah, Pixel 7 fits nicely in there. The first time I lifted the hood, I knew it was time for this Commodore PET to get a good interior scrubbing. Externally, my PET was clean and in excellent condition. Scott gave the device lots of love and attention to the exterior, even touching up scratches with paint. Opening the Commodore PET revealed an interior of dirt. Scott later mentioned that he wanted to clean the interior before VCFMW 2022, but he simply ran out of time. I was not adverse to cleaning and grabbed a few things to get started. I grabbed the alcohol swabs, a toothbrush, and a rag. I removed the motherboard to make cleanup easier and inspected everything as I removed them for any damage. There was none. In the end, the interior looked pristine. Now I have to keep it that way. Yep, passes inspection. Once the PET was all cleaned up, it was time to make the upgrades. And what upgrades did I choose? Well, let's cover those. There were 4 upgrades I selected, and we'll talk about each one in detail. But first, let me list the upgrades for you. First of all, the SD to PET Future from the Future was 8-bit for $100. The Commodore PET RAM ROM from the Future was 8-bit for $85. The dual joystick adapter for the PET from, you guessed it, the Future was 8-bit for $20. And then a wonderful little device I learned about later called Stupid Pet Tricks for $55. Now, it's important to note that before some of these upgrades will work, I did have to get the PET RAM ROM working first because I had to upgrade the ROM to a later version, and for some software, I was going to need 32 kilobytes of memory. Total cost for the upgrades was about $260. Now, I could have saved $20 if I had not purchased the redundant PET dual joystick adapter, since Stupid Pet Tricks also included joystick adapters. Now, let's take a look at each upgrade individually. Let's start with the SD to PET Future. The SD to PET Future plugs into the IEEE 488 port on the back of the PET. It requires power, and that adapter plugs into the Datasette port. The SD card is accessible from the rear of the PET, as are the drive reset button and the activity LED that flashes red and green. You fat format the SD card, you drop on .prg or .d64 image files, then you use these complicated open commands to access the files. However, stay tuned. The RAM-ROM expansion has a few stupid pet tricks up its sleeve as well. And speaking of the Commodore PET ROM expansion, let's dive into that one. Installation was a breeze. You simply remove the original 6502 processor, you plug the RAM-ROM into the PET motherboard 6502 socket, you plug the 6502 processor into the RAM-ROM board, you set the dip switches to activate a ROM version and set memory expansion, you turn on the PET, and voila, you've upgraded the ROM and RAM on your Commodore PET. Now, as I mentioned before, some of the upgrades I'm going to use require later ROMs. The reason for the later ROMs is in version 1 of the ROM, the IEEE 488 port wasn't even active. It wasn't until version 2 that you could even use that port. New owners of the Commodore PET 2001 probably tried to plug in a device into that port only to find it didn't work. So they would have to contact their Commodore dealer and get a new ROM. I'll say when I first used the SD to PET Future, I became frustrated with the long commands necessary to access disk images and program files. But after reading the RAM-ROM instructions, I discovered the ROM includes Nils Eiler's DOS Wedge as an option. To use it, I simply type SYS 36864. Basic 4 ROM Wedge 2015 12-10 installed. Now, with the DOS Wedge installed, I can use simplified commands such as the / to load software. As a matter of fact, I use the same keyboard shortcut on my Mega 65. Now, I'm not going to cover these features in detail in this video. It's way too complicated and too much for what I'm trying to do today. But hey, if you have interest in learning more about DOS Wedge or this upgrade to the Commodore PET, drop a comment down below and say, hey, retroCombs, why don't you spend some time sharing more about those features? Now, the Future was 8-bit upgrade purchase for the Commodore PET I made was to purchase the PET dual joystick adapter. And again, I kind of wish I had not because the Stupid Pet Tricks includes it. However, I'm going to hang on to it, and I'm happy to support retro computing folks who create new devices for these retro computers. Although here's a cool feature. Check on the back of the PCB. there's information, a little basic program so that you can test whether or not your joystick ports are working. Nice little addition there. And probably the most impactful upgrade I made besides the RAM-ROM was the
stupid pet tricks. No.
Not the David Letterman stupid pet tricks, but the stupid pet tricks from Bit Zeal. Stupid pet tricks plugs into a user port, adds joysticks and sound to play games with beautiful pet ski characters and graphics. Other features include single joystick, full function compatible with Space Invaders, for instance, dual joysticks, a 3.5mm sound port, Wi-Fi module up to 24 bits per second, the Pet Term software module programmed with the ZI modem code, and a power tap adapter to draw power for the Wi-Fi modem from the Datasette port. That's a whole lot of tricks in a single device. So those are all the upgrades I made to the Commodore PET. Now let's talk about whether those upgrades were worth their cost and did they really add anything to the Commodore PET. I think the thing that amazed me most was that all these upgrades worked in tandem with each other. The SD2 PET Future and Stupid Pet Tricks both draw power from a user port, and I worried that it was a one or the other affair, which would not be ideal. However, the Stupid Pet Tricks power tap option includes a pass-through, allowing me to plug in the SD2 PET Future. Nice! Thanks for thinking of that, Bit Zeal. Now, as I mentioned, in order to use the SD2 PET Future, the PET needs ROM version 2 or 4 instead of the stock version 1. That's where the RAM-ROM upgrade came in, as we saw earlier by flipping those dip switches. So what I've done is I have upgraded the Commodore PET I have from 8 kilobytes to 32 kilobytes with ROM version 4, which again includes that wonderful DOS Wedge utility. The great thing is I can use the tape drive to load and save programs. However, using the SD2 PET Future with an upgraded ROM means I don't need to search for that bulky 8050 floppy drive unit, which would sit over here and is almost as big as my Commodore PET. And the SD2 PET Future loads programs so much faster. As I mentioned, the RAM-ROM unit upgrades memory to 32 kilobytes and gives me the option to run more software than I could with just the stock 8 kilobytes. The Stupid Pet Tricks joystick ports make playing games alone or now with a friend more enjoyable and accurate. It's a lot more accurate than using cursor keys or the alphanumeric keys to control game characters. Tapping into the sound of the Commodore PET means games and other programs now have audio cues. And lastly, I can now use my PET as a true computer terminal by connecting to various BBSs using the Wi-Fi modem. That's a lot of new features on a hampered stock Commodore PET. With the investment I made into the PET, these individual upgrades were kind of an easy decision. The only disappointment in my upgrades is there's no option to turn this 9-inch 40-column screen into an 80-column screen. If that option was available, I could take advantage of an even larger display of Commodore PET software titles. I assume that's not possible. I'm sure somebody out there watching this, if it is possible, will let me know though, right? Do it down in the comments below. So would I recommend upgrades for someone who just purchased a stock Commodore PET? I mentioned earlier that I would love to have an 80-column display. The other thing I would love to have is a full-size keyboard. In later models of the Commodore PET, the Datasette was removed so that Commodore could install a full-size keyboard. I also know from my research that later Commodore PETs had some additional capabilities that this one will never have. I'd like to experience one of those later PETs, but after this investment, I'm not sure I can afford another. There's one variant, the Super PET, I'd love to add to my collection. It includes a larger 12-inch 80-column screen with 96 kilobytes of memory, BASIC 4.0, and other programming languages including Waterloo Micro APL, Micro Fortran, Micro Basic, Micro Pascal, and everybody's favorite, Micro COBOL. Hey, I could start learning COBOL and servicing all those ATM machines out there. So that would be my dream PET. If you'd like to know why or learn a little bit more about it, check out the Zimmers.net Super PET page, link down below and in the companion blog post. Once you do read it though, you're going to know why I am drooling over a Super PET. And let me know if you know of one that's out there somewhere. What about my upgrades? Even though they didn't bring me the super pet status, do I recommend them? I have to say, absolutely. And as I mentioned before, if you'd like to learn more about each of these upgrades, just drop a comment below and I'll consider making longer videos on each one of those upgrades. But these upgrades definitely make the Commodore PET more usable, fun, and interesting. Combined, these upgrades were not inexpensive, but neither was the Commodore PET. Without this additional investment, the PET would have just been a showpiece. It would have sat there in its version 1 ROM, not doing a whole lot of anything. These upgrades, though, allow further experimentation and exploration of the PET's history. As a plus, these upgrades can be removed to return the Commodore PET to its original state. Other than cost, there's no reason not to upgrade your Commodore PET with one or more of these devices. So did I convince you that if you have a Commodore PET, you should just do the upgrades? I hope so. Love to hear your thoughts. Make sure you drop those down in the comments below. Remember to like, subscribe, alert, do all that business down at the bottom. And hey, if you want to learn more about another great Commodore style computer, actually the last computer in the Commodore PET lineage, I would say, check out this video on the Mega 65. And if you want to learn about my first computer, the Commodore VIC-20, check out this video. Thanks for joining me down this little drive down Commodore PET history and my acquisition of this Commodore PET retroCombs out.